This is Hillary with Baer Insurance. I'm here with Andy Mendelson, who is the Chief Risk Management Officer and also an architect with Berkeley Design Professionals. Today, we're going to be talking about the standard of care. I think the standard of care is one of the single most important elements of a professional services agreement. So Andy, thank you so much for being with me here today. And we're just going to quickly touch on this contract clause.
My pleasure, Hillary, and I agree with you that the standard of care is perhaps the foundational clause in a professional services agreement. When an architect or engineer or other design consultant faces a claim and there's an allegation of an error or omission, the plaintiff will bring forward expert witnesses that will challenge the design professional's performance under the standard of care. And of course, we as the insurance carrier will provide defense to the design professionals to establish that the standard of care was followed. That's why we like to see the standard of care be defined consistent with what normal contract law is and what instructions to a jury would be by a judge. And that means it's not based on perfection, but it's based on services consistent with professional skill and care ordinarily performed by design consultants practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. And that you're going to perform those services as expeditiously and as consistent with such professional skill and care and the orderly progress of the project. And that second part is important because of the need to perform in accordance with the schedule that you've agreed upon with the owner. And in this regard, you're not warranting or guaranteeing that schedule performance. What's interesting about the phrase same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances is that it relates directly to the nature and character of the project itself. Say you are a small firm and you are developing your business to expand into a new market or service. Let's use an example, my own background. I started most of my career as an architect working in K through 12 school projects. As my firm grew into healthcare facilities and then other types of what I would call higher end, higher complexity projects, we needed to make sure that we had that expertise on board within the firm in order to provide services appropriately for those other types of projects. So the ordinary and same circumstances puts you in a category similar to other architects and engineers working on that project type. So just be careful about that. We like to see design professionals expand their business, but only do so when they have the skills available in-house or through consultants to provide those services in accordance with the standard of care.
How would you say the standard of care has evolved over the last 3 to 5 years?
We're in an interesting period right now as we speak towards the end of 2020, where I actually see the standard of care, which evolves over time, kind of accelerate over the last couple of years and even this year due to the pandemic, COVID-19 and design considerations that should be discussed with your client relative to social distancing and sanitation, ventilation, other factors that are coming into play for really any type of project type other than single family residential. The longer term evolution factors over the last 10 years have been really due to two factors. The first is sustainable design and the related subject of resiliency in design. And resiliency means the ability of a structure or an infrastructure project to withstand a severe climate event. And we are seeing such severe climate events occurring really all over the country, particularly in coastal areas, near major waterways. There are fires happening out west, things like that. So these are issues that are evolving due to climate change and the need for the architects and engineers to really understand what's going on and be able to respond in helping the owner establish design criteria, number one, and then implementing design solutions consistent with the recommendations that you're making. Particularly for engineers, it's a learned profession, scientific profession, and you're expected to understand what's happening out there in the world ahead of what is going to eventually change relative to codes and regulations, because codes and regulations tend to lag what's happening, relative to, as an example, climate events. So right now I understand ICC, the International Code Council, which is going to update the International Building Code, IBC, in 2021, is in fact studying the design criteria for code, and it's a very widely used building code as adapted and adopted by local jurisdictions. And so those codes are going to start addressing these issues. But still, how long have severe storms been around, particularly over the last 3 to 5 years? If you're doing business in Texas, as an example, all the flooding that's been going on, and hurricanes in the southeast portion of the country and the like. So that's, sustainability and resiliency. The other factor that's been evolving is the use of technology in practice.
Mm-hmm.
We're waiting for the results of the 2020 AIA firm survey, but the last go around indicates that somewhere north of 80% of architects are using building information modeling. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to use it. As an example, if you are a smaller practice working on single family residential, maybe some multifamily residential and small commercial, where the projects are not of a high degree of complexity, the chances are your use of CAD and your ability to put some perhaps 3D overlay on that might work just fine. But if you're working on larger, more complex projects, even starting at the municipal level and continuing into healthcare and government facilities and corporations, there's an expectation that you as a design professional are utilizing more advanced technologies. And as a result, this can impact the standard of care.
What if you get, sometimes with government contracts, it's more of a take it or leave it type approach with, what they're handing architects and engineers to sign. What do you suggest for firms to do at that point?
Well, you need to have an agreement as to the use of electronic files. It would be unreasonable for an owner not to agree to that, because the files are going to be utilized by contractors, by subcontractors, suppliers, as well as the owner. And the design professional needs reasonable protections if their files are misused or used for an intent of the recipient that is other than construction of the actual project. Regarding the use of BIM, we are not seeing a lot of that required by clients, other than at this time, the federal government and certain state governments. As an example, the GSA, the General Services Administration, the VA, which is the Department of Veterans Affairs, which builds a lot of hospitals, they have their own standards in place for building information modeling. And there are some universities and healthcare systems as well. So when you're pursuing a project like that, that's part of the rules of the game, and you need to understand that, and you need to understand those terms and conditions. For private projects, when we've been looking at contract reviews, we're not seeing a lot of demand for that, but there are a number of private entities that are perhaps more sophisticated in terms of their project delivery approaches, their experience, and these larger property owners are looking to BIM and other technologies to help them manage risk for change orders, schedule, cost control, and the like. They are not looking for you to guarantee or warranty that applicability, but they are looking to these systems to help them manage their own risk in the process.
How do you, and this can be just outside of standard of care, but maybe as it specifically relates to this, what do you think, how do you suggest a design professional negotiate an unreasonable request to a change or an addition within the contract? How do you suggest the design professional go about doing that, working through that?
The most important asset that a design professional has is their professional liability insurance policy in terms of responding to a claim by an owner. And other than the really large firms, those that are listed in the ENR, maybe the top 200 or whatever, and these firms do have substantial assets beyond their professional liability policy, but most architects and engineers don't have a lot of cash on hand, don't have a lot of assets. And so the owner needs to understand that when they create unreasonable terms and conditions that are uninsurable, and the professional liability insurance carrier will not pay on those, it might compromise the design professional's coverage overall. So that's really the number one way we recommend approaching it. You know, if the owner is, first of all, there's a reasonable status that should be deployed, really, that there are risks that need to be maintained by all the parties to the project and those parties that are best able to manage that risk. And the architect and engineer cannot have an unlimited amount of risk here. It has to be something that is covered by their professional liability insurance policy, which means within the normal standard of care and reasonable industry standard terms and conditions.
Do you think sometimes attorneys and then oftentimes insurance carriers, not Berkeley, of course, but they, really strive to have design professionals have that perfect contract? And I know you mentioned earlier that you're not really striving for perfection, but do you think that's often the case? And sometimes isn't it better to document any discussions and changes outside of just having a perfect contract?
That's a really good point you make. We do know that not every contract negotiation ends up favorable or balanced in respect to the design professionals. So it is a good idea to have documentation of the negotiation and have that in your file. That way, if your client is making a claim against you and the terms and conditions of the agreement that they would not budge on, you at least have that paper trail, and that would be helpful in defense of the claim.
Okay. And and a lot of times in almost every construction project, there's some kind of an error or omission in plan specs during construction. So again, do you have, I guess when it's you find some error omission during the construction process, what do you suggest at that point for the design professional to do?
Well, first of all, keep accurate records of change orders. Some owners at the governmental level assign what they call reason codes to change orders. And if they're doing that, make sure that you are reviewing that. And if they're assigning these to errors and omissions rather than, reasonable coordination issues and the like, you need to object to that in writing. It really starts with development of the project budget and the advice that you are providing to your client, the property owner, as to contingencies that they need to maintain. Having this discussion about standard of care, that it's not perfection, that there's going to be a range, percentage range, which is going to vary depending on the project. We like to say for new construction, it might be 3% to 5% of the change orders that are going to invariably occur on a project. Reconstruction project is a unique opportunity. And even if it's a prototypical facility that's being reproduced on another site, it's going to be different from the other site. So change orders are going to occur. And so the contingency needs to be established by the owner and needs to be maintained throughout the construction process. So it's a remodeling project, a renovation project, if it has special characteristics such as historic preservation, the percentages that should be carried and developed and carried by the owner should be higher than that 3% to 5% range. So you do have an obligation to be diligent in your professional services and help manage those costs, but it is not perfection. And the cost to the owner on the day of the bid, when they open those bids and sign the construction contract, those costs are going to go up by change orders that are within the reasonable standard of care.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. I know it's of no secret that the standard of care has certainly evolved recently and over the last several years. So this is definitely a contract clause that needs some attention paid to it and some, communication around with whether your attorney, your insurance agent, your insurance carrier, all the like. So thank you so much for your time this morning, Andy.